Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing and peaceful tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is The Journey to Frozen Falls. So, get comfortable, let go of the day, and allow yourself to drift into the heart of a frozen landscape where the silence of the snow-covered world and the beauty of nature's stillness will guide you to a place of peaceful wonder. Now, let's begin. Sarah and Michael stood at the edge of the frozen river, their breath mingling with the cold air in soft clouds. Before them stretched a seemingly endless path of ice, glistening under the soft, pale winter sun. Snow lay in thick blankets on either side of the river, muffling every sound, except for the quiet crunch of snow beneath their boots as they took their first step onto the frozen surface. The world around them was still, peaceful, and in that moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Their hearts were full of quiet excitement. This was the journey they had dreamed of for years, a trek on a frozen river through a world carved by winter, leading to the majestic frozen falls, a place they had only seen in their minds, a destination whispered about by other travelers, but rarely reached. Today, they were stepping into that dream. As they walked, their footsteps slow and deliberate, the silence around them seemed to deepen. It was a soft silence, the kind that wraps around you like a thick woolen blanket, comforting in its stillness. The river beneath their feet was solid, its smooth surface shimmering like glass. Sarah tightened her grip on Michael's hand, and he gave a reassuring squeeze in return. "We've finally started," Sarah whispered, her voice carried away by the faint wind. Michael smiled, his eyes tracing the line of the river that stretched out before them. "We have." Their journey had begun. This trek was something they had talked about for years, over quiet dinners by the fire, or while sipping tea in the mornings as they watched the seasons change outside their window. It was an idea born from their love of winter, of snow, of the peacefulness that the cold seemed to bring to the world. But it was more than that. It was a longing for something greater, something that felt untouched, unspoiled by the rush of life. The frozen falls represented that for them, a place of stillness, of beauty, of quiet triumph. For years, their lives had been filled with routine, work, responsibilities, and the small tasks that filled their days. They were content in a way, but always there was a quiet whisper at the back of their minds, a longing to step beyond the familiar, to embark on an adventure that would leave an imprint on their souls. The frozen falls became their dream, and this winter, they decided, was the time to make it real. In the weeks leading up to their departure, their home was filled with the quiet hum of preparation. Sarah carefully packed their gear: warm clothes, insulated boots, thick blankets, and enough food to last them for days. Michael checked their equipment, making sure their tent, stove, and supplies were in perfect condition. Every evening, they would sit together by the fire, planning their route, dreaming of the moment they would finally stand before the frozen cascade, the journey behind them, and the world of ice and snow stretched out in all directions. Now, with each step they took on the frozen river, that dream was slowly becoming reality. The world around them was vast and white, the landscape stretching out in soft curves and gentle slopes, dusted with snow. Trees lined the riverbank, their branches heavy with frost, bending under the weight of winter. The sky above was pale and endless, a soft canvas of muted blue, with only the faintest hint of the sun glowing behind the clouds. Their pace was steady, unhurried. They had all the time in the world, or at least it felt that way. The silence, the cold, the stillness, it wrapped around them like a cocoon, insulating them from everything except the present moment. Every now and then, they would stop to catch their breath, to sip warm tea from their flasks, or simply to stand and take in the beauty of the frozen world around them. Sarah smiled as she watched a gentle breeze lift the fine powder of snow, sending it swirling through the air like tiny crystals. I never thought silence could be so full. Michael nodded. It's like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something. Their voices were soft, as if anything louder would break the delicate peace that surrounded them. It was a world of stillness, where even their thoughts seemed to slow, drifting like snowflakes in the cold air. That night, they made camp by the riverbank, their small tent nestled between two towering pines. The snow crunched softly underfoot as Michael built a fire, the warmth a welcome contrast to the cold air that surrounded them. Sarah prepared a simple meal, their breath visible in the crisp night air, as they sat close to the fire, savoring the warmth. The world around them was quiet, save for the soft crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. The stars above were brilliant, shimmering against the deep black sky. It was a peaceful night, and as they sat together, wrapped in thick blankets, they felt a deep sense of contentment. We're really doing it, Sarah murmured, gazing up at the sky. We're really here. Michael smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. We are, and tomorrow we'll be even closer. They fell asleep that night, the fire slowly dying down to glowing embers, the cold air pressing in around their little tent. And yet, there was warmth in the stillness, a sense of quiet fulfillment that filled their dreams. The next day, the landscape grew more dramatic. The river narrowed further, winding through a canyon of ice and snow. The air grew colder, crisper, and the silence deepened, if that was even possible. It was as if the world itself had become a frozen painting, each detail perfectly still, perfectly preserved. Sarah and Michael walked in silence, their breath steady, their footsteps light on the ice. The journey felt timeless, as though they were the only two people in the world, moving through a landscape that had been untouched for centuries. The air smelled of snow and pine, sharp and clean, filling their lungs with each breath. They didn't speak much as they walked, their focus on the path ahead, but every now and then, Michael would glance over at Sarah, and she would smile, her eyes bright with the same wonder that filled his heart. This was what they had dreamed of. This sense of being completely immersed in the moment, of walking through a world that was both vast and intimate, familiar and unknown. As they rounded a gentle bend in the frozen river, Sarah and Michael felt the air shift, colder, more silent. The landscape around them seemed to hold its breath, and then, slowly, the shimmering outline of the falls began to emerge in the distance. At first, it was just a faint glint of light on the horizon, but as they drew closer, the image became clearer, more defined, until the full majesty of the frozen falls stood before them. The towering wall of ice was breathtaking, each layer of frozen water forming intricate sculptures that caught the pale winter light. Most of the falls, once powerful and roaring, were now suspended mid-motion, a cascade of ice frozen in time. But one portion of the falls remained active, not with water, but with snow. A steady flow of snow fell continuously, like delicate powder cascading down the cliff, adding a soft, magical element to the otherwise still scene. The snow shimmered in the faint light, catching on the icy edges as it fell, a final movement before the entire falls would soon be frozen solid in the coming days. The combination of the frozen ice and the softly falling snow created a scene of unmatched beauty, as if nature had designed the landscape to hold both stillness and motion in perfect balance. The sight was mesmerizing, and Sarah and Michael stood in awe, breathless, their hands clasped tightly together. The frozen masterpiece before them was beyond anything they had imagined, more beautiful than words could describe. The world seemed to stop, as if time itself had frozen alongside the falls. Sarah's eyes glistened with wonder. "It's like nothing I've ever seen." Michael nodded, his voice soft with awe. "It feels like we've stepped into a place where time doesn't exist." The air around them was sharp, the cold biting at their skin, but they barely noticed. All they could feel was the overwhelming beauty of the moment, the profound sense of stillness that filled the space between them and the frozen falls. It was a place of pure magic, a place that felt eternal, untouched by the passage of time. The journey had been long, but standing there, in the presence of the frozen falls, they knew it had all been worth it. This was a moment they would carry with them for the rest of their lives, a moment of pure, untouched beauty in a world that often moved too fast. Here, in the stillness, they had found something profound, something they hadn't known they were searching for. And as they stood there, in the quiet shadow of the frozen cascade, watching the snow fall softly around them, they realized that the stillness they had experienced would stay with them long after the snow had melted and the falls had flowed once more. Sarah and Michael stayed at the foot of the frozen falls for what felt like an eternity, yet it also passed in the blink of an eye. Time in that place seemed irrelevant. The world had shrunk to just the two of them, the towering ice sculptures, and the profound stillness that wrapped around them like a soft, cold blanket. Eventually, as the light began to fade, they knew it was time to set up camp. The journey to the falls had taken most of the day, and now the soft hues of dusk were painting the sky in shades of lavender and rose. Reluctantly, they turned away from the frozen masterpiece and made their way to a small clearing not far from the riverbank. They worked in silence, setting up their tent, building a small fire, and preparing a simple meal of soup and bread. The fire crackled softly in the cold night air, sending small embers drifting up toward the stars. The warmth of the fire was welcome, but Sarah and Michael barely felt the cold now. The memory of the falls lingered in their minds, filling them with a quiet sense of fulfillment. As they sat by the fire, bundled in thick blankets, Sarah gazed at the stars that had begun to dot the darkening sky. "I feel like we've touched something timeless today," she whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Michael nodded, his eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "I think we have. It's like, for a moment, we stepped outside of the world we know and into something ancient, something eternal." They didn't say much more after that. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive, in the deep quiet of the night. Instead, they let the silence speak for them, a silence filled with the weight of their shared experience. When they finally climbed into their tent, the cold night pressing in around them, they fell asleep almost immediately, their dreams filled with images of the frozen falls, the glistening ice, and the profound stillness that had touched their souls. The journey back felt different. There was a lightness to their steps now, a quiet joy that filled the space between them as they retraced their path along the frozen river. The landscape, though unchanged, seemed more familiar, more intimate, as if the world had revealed some of its secrets to them during their trek. The trees, heavy with snow, no longer loomed quite as tall. The river, still a smooth, glistening path of ice, now felt like an old friend, guiding them gently home. Even the cold, sharp as it was, didn't seem as biting. It felt like a part of the experience, something they had come to accept and even appreciate. Every now and then, Sarah would glance over at Michael, and he would smile back, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had shared. There was no need for words. They both knew that this experience had changed them in some quiet, unspoken way. As the days passed, they moved steadily closer to home, the frozen river slowly giving way to familiar landmarks. The snow seemed to grow deeper, the cold more intense, but Sarah and Michael didn't mind. They were in no rush to return. The stillness of the journey had seeped into their bones, and they were content to savor each step, each quiet moment. Finally, after several days of walking, the outline of their small home came into view, nestled against the snowy hills. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, a sign of warmth and comfort waiting for them inside. As they approached, the familiar sights of home brought a smile to Sarah's face, though there was a quiet ache in her chest. Michael must have felt it too, because he squeezed her hand as they stopped for a moment at the edge of the frozen river, looking back at the path they had traveled. The falls were far behind them now, hidden by miles of snow and ice, but the memory of them was still sharp, still vivid in their minds. "I already miss it," Sarah said softly, her breath visible in the cold air. Michael nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. "So do I, but it's something we'll carry with us, even here. That stillness, that quiet, it'll always be a part of us now." They stood there for a few more moments, letting the weight of their journey settle into their hearts before finally turning toward home. Inside, the warmth of the fire welcomed them back, wrapping them in its comforting embrace. The familiar scent of the wood burning in the hearth, the soft crackling of the flames, and the cozy interior of their home filled them with a sense of peace. But even as they settled into the comfort of their surroundings, something felt different. The stillness they had found on the frozen river, the quiet that had wrapped itself around them at the falls, was still with them. It was as though the world outside their home had shifted, slowed down to match the rhythm they had found on their journey. Sarah sat by the fire, sipping hot tea, her mind drifting back to the frozen landscape. "I keep thinking about how quiet it was out there," she said softly, her voice reflecting the calm she still carried with her. "It's like the world just stopped for a little while." Michael, sitting beside her, nodded. "I've never felt anything like it. That kind of silence, it stays with you." They sat in companionable silence, letting the warmth of the fire and the memory of their journey settle into their bones. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than the one they had experienced on the frozen river. It was softer, more familiar, but somehow they found that they missed the sharp stillness of the frozen world they had left behind. In the days that followed, life slowly returned to its familiar rhythm. The routine of daily tasks resumed, gathering firewood, preparing meals, and tending to the little things that made up their days. But the memory of their trek to the frozen falls lingered, like a quiet echo in the back of their minds. There were moments when Sarah would pause, her hands stilling in the midst of some task, and her mind would drift back to the frozen river, to the way the light had caught the ice, to the profound silence that had wrapped around them like a soft shroud. And Michael, too, would sometimes stop what he was doing, his eyes far away, lost in the memory of the frozen cascade and the stillness that had touched them both so deeply. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Sarah turned to Michael with a soft smile. "Do you think we'll ever go back?" Michael looked into the flames, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe, but even if we don't, I feel like it's always with us. That place, that stillness, it's something we carry now." Sarah nodded, her heart full. "It's like we found something out there, something we didn't even know we were looking for." Michael smiled, his hand resting gently on hers. "Exactly." And so, life went on, but it was different now. There was a new stillness in their hearts, a quiet peace that had settled in during their trek on the frozen river. The memory of the falls, the cold, the silence, and the beauty of that frozen world remained with them, a constant reminder of the quiet wonders the world held for those willing to seek them out. In the warmth of their home, they missed the freezing cold, the crisp air, and the quiet that had wrapped itself around them on their journey. But they knew that the stillness they had experienced at the frozen falls would stay with them for a lifetime, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures are the ones that lead you to a place of quiet wonder. As they sat by the fire that night, the flames casting soft shadows on the walls, Sarah and Michael felt a deep sense of peace. They had achieved something profound on their journey, something that would stay with them forever. It wasn't just the falls themselves that had left a mark on their hearts. It was the stillness, the quiet, the sense of having stepped outside the rush of the world and into a place where time didn't exist. And as they drifted off to sleep that night, the memory of the frozen falls lingered in their dreams, a quiet echo of a journey that had changed them in ways they were only just beginning to understand. Thank you for joining us on Story Planet. If you felt like you were right there on the frozen river, marveling at the stillness of the falls and breathing in the crisp, cold air, consider giving a thumbs up. And if the story brought you peace and calm, feel free to share it with friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe for daily stories from Story Planet, offering serene escapes every day. Wishing you a peaceful night and a relaxed sleep. Sweet dreams.